The Galactic Preservation Institute hung in space like a monument to hubris, orbiting a neutron star that pulsed with the kind of radiation that would turn an unshielded human into soup in about 30 seconds. Fortunately, the station's shields were excellent. Had to be, considering it housed the galaxy's most comprehensive collection of extinct civilizations. Nothing says, "learn from history," quite like a museum dedicated entirely to species that spectacularly failed to survive themselves. Gina stood in the observation corridor, nursing her third coffee of the morning, which, given that morning on the station was an arbitrary concept, really just meant she'd been awake for 4 hours and needed caffeine to deal with the existential weight of being the only human in her xenoarchaeology cohort. The coffee was terrible. Synthetic, vat-grown, optimized for 17 different alien metabolisms, and absolutely perfect for none of them. She drank it anyway, because spite was a universal constant, and also because she was 26 and constitutionally incapable of functioning without stimulants. "Gina!" Quillmesh skittered up beside her, all 6 limbs clicking against the polished floor in what passed for enthusiasm among insectoid species. "Did you complete the reading on the Krillnox atmospheric poisoning incident? Fascinating stuff. They essentially created a cascading chemical reaction that—" Yeah, they huffed their own fumes until everyone died," Gina said, taking another sip of terrible coffee. "Real page-turner. Couldn't put it down. Wept for their loss." Quillmesh's antennae drooped slightly. "You didn't read it." "I skimmed the abstract. They're dead. Spoiler alert." "You are impossible," Quillmesh said, but there was warmth in the buzzing undertone of their voice. The insectoid had befriended Gina during orientation, much to the horror of Bakth, who believed social hierarchies should be respected, and humans were decidedly at the bottom of the academic food chain. Speaking of whom, Bakth materialized beside them, his crystalline form refracting the neutron star's glow into nauseating prismatic patterns. When he spoke, it sounded like wind chimes being tortured. "The human is unprepared again. How predictable." "The crystalline is still a pompous ass," Gina replied cheerfully. "How predictable." Bakth made a sound like shattering glass, which Gina had learned meant he was laughing, or possibly experiencing indigestion. The translator matrix wasn't entirely clear on that point. "Perhaps if your species spent less time destroying your own planet and more time actually studying—" "Children," Zero interrupted, his amphibious bulk squelching up behind them. He was eating again, some kind of bioluminescent fungi that glowed faintly blue as he stuffed it into his wide mouth. "Can we not do this before the lecture? I'm too tired for your mating display." "We're not—" Gina started. "It's not a—" Bakth said simultaneously, Zero's throat sac inflated in what passed for a smirk among his species. "Sure. Keep telling yourselves that." He took another bite of fungus, unbothered by their protests. The corridor chimed. Professor Uldren's 4 eyes appeared on the display screens, blinking in sequence like the world's most unsettling traffic light. "Students, please proceed to the Hall of the Departed. Today's lesson concerns civilizations that chose extinction over adaptation. I trust you'll find it illuminating." Uldren had a particular way of saying things that made Gina's teeth itch. Everything was illuminating, or fascinating, or quite remarkable, delivered in a tone that suggested he was explaining quantum mechanics to particularly slow children. Which, to be fair, was probably how he viewed humans. Humanity had only been part of the galactic community for 80 years. A cosmic eye blink. Most species had been spacefaring longer than humans had been writing things down. The Hall of the Departed was exactly as depressing as it sounded. Massive and vaulted, with exhibits stretching into the distance like tombstones for entire civilizations. Each display contained artifacts, holographic recreations, and plaques written in Galactic standard that essentially said, "Here's who they were, here's what they built, here's how they died. Don't do that." Gina wandered through the exhibits with the kind of detached interest usually reserved for dental appointments. The Krillnox display showed their beautiful floating cities, right next to images of the same cities choked with toxic clouds of their own making. The Memthari section featured stunning artwork, sculptures that seemed to exist in more dimensions than 3, alongside the mystery of their overnight disappearance. Every member of their species, gone in a single planetary rotation. No bodies, no explanations, just empty cities and unanswered questions. "Quite remarkable, isn't it?" Professor Uldren said, appearing beside Gina with the disconcerting silence that came from having evolved on a prey-heavy world. The Memthari were extraordinarily advanced. Their loss represents a gap in galactic knowledge that we may never fill. Gina said, only half listening. Her datapad was displaying a message from her grandmother back on Earth, complaining about the weather in Marseille and asking when Gina was going to quit playing with space bugs and come home to find a nice boy or girl or non-binary partner and settle down. "And here," Uldren continued, gesturing to a new exhibit with the enthusiasm of someone who genuinely loved his job, "we have recent acquisitions from Sector Phi 88, the predecessor Vanguard. Now there's a mystery worth your attention." Gina glanced up from her datapad, ready to nod politely and move on. Then she actually looked at the display, and her brain stuttered to a complete halt. The centerpiece was a crystallized battle standard, roughly 2 meters tall, preserved in a stasis field that made it shimmer like heat haze. It was clearly ancient. The crystallization suggested it had been subjected to some catastrophic energy event that had fused the metal and fabric into a single artifact. Beautiful, in a haunting sort of way. But that wasn't what made Gina's coffee cup slip from her fingers and hit the floor with a wet splat. It was the emblem on the standard, a phoenix rising over crossed swords beneath twin moons. The Durant family crest. Her family crest. The same symbol tattooed on her left shoulder. The same emblem that hung in her grandmother's house, above the mantel, in a frame that had been in the family for, according to family legend, longer than anyone could remember. "Gina?" Quillmesh's antennae twitched with concern. "Are you functioning properly? Your bioluminescence has changed?" Pause. "Wait, humans don't have bioluminescence? Why are you so pale?" "That," Gina said, her voice coming out strangled, "that's my family crest." Professor Uldren's 4 eyes blinked in sequence. Confusion, followed by what might have been condescending amusement. "I'm sorry, what?" Gina pointed at the standard with a shaking hand. "That symbol. Phoenix, swords, twin moons. That's the Durant family crest. My family. From Earth." Bokth made his shattering glass laugh. "The human thinks her primitive lineage connects to the predecessor Vanguard. How adorable!" "I'm not joking," Gina snapped. She pulled down the collar of her shirt, revealing the tattoo on her shoulder. Identical. Perfect match. "Explain that." The amusement faded from Uldren's expression, replaced by genuine confusion. He leaned closer, eyes focusing on the tattoo, then on the standard, then back to the tattoo. That's quite a coincidence." "Is it?" Gina demanded. "Because I'm looking at a symbol that's supposedly 12,000 years old, on a relic from a dead civilization, and it's the exact same symbol my family's been using since medieval France at minimum. You want to tell me how that works?" "Convergent design?" Quillmesh offered hesitantly. Similar aesthetic preferences arising independently across— That's not a simple design, Gina interrupted. That's specific. The angle of the swords, the way the phoenix's wings curve, the position of the moons. That's not random convergence, that's identical. Zero had stopped eating, which, for him, signaled genuine interest. The human raises a valid point. Statistical probability of exact duplication is minimal. Professor Uldren straightened, his expression carefully neutral. Miss Gina, I understand this is surprising, but you must understand. Humans only achieved spaceflight recently. Your species has been in the galactic community for less than a standard century. The predecessor Vanguard went extinct 12,000 years ago. Then explain the Crest. Coincidence. Remarkable coincidence, but coincidence nonetheless. Bull, Gina said flatly. You're a xenoarchaeologist. You know better than to dismiss data just because it's inconvenient. Uldren's 4 eyes narrowed. What are you suggesting? I'm not suggesting anything. I'm demanding answers. Gina pulled out her datapad, fingers flying across the screen. My family keeps records. Genealogy going back to the 1200s, possibly earlier. The crest itself? Origin unknown. Family legend says it's older than France. Older than written records. Human record-keeping from that period is notoriously unreliable, Bach said dismissively. So, let me see the Vanguard records, Gina shot back. You've got archives, right? Information on what they looked like? Where they came from? Uldren hesitated, just for a moment, but Gina caught it. The predecessor Vanguard left very little biological evidence. They've been extinct long enough that even their bones have decomposed to constituent atoms. We have their technology, their architecture, their symbols, but not them. Convenient, Gina said. It's reality, Uldren replied, but his voice had gone tight. Professional. The voice of someone who wanted this conversation to end. I appreciate your interest, Miss Gina, but you're reading too much into a visual similarity. Symbols repeat across cultures. It's a well-documented phenomenon. Then you won't mind if I access the archives, Gina said. Cross-reference Vanguard sites with human historical records, just to satisfy my curiosity. The pause was longer this time, too long. I suppose limited access could be arranged, Uldren said finally. Under supervision, of course. You're still a student. Of course, Gina replied, her smile sharp enough to cut. Wouldn't want me stumbling into anything inconvenient. If Uldren caught the barb, he didn't react. He simply nodded, gestured for the class to continue the tour, and moved on to the next exhibit. Something about the builders and their mysterious digital ascension. But Gina didn't follow. She stood in front of the crystallized standard, staring at a symbol she'd seen her entire life, now separated from her by 12 millennia and a stasis field. You're actually going to pursue this, Quilmesh said quietly beside her. Damn right I am. It could be nothing. It could be everything. Quilmesh's antennae twitched. Curiosity, concern, and something that might have been excitement. Then I'm helping. You'll need someone who can bypass security protocols. I can bypass security protocols, Gina said. You're a human. You still think passwords are adequate protection. I am an insectoid. My species invented pheromone-based encryption matrices while yours was still figuring out fire. Quilmesh paused. No offense. Some taken. But you're not wrong. Gina finally tore her gaze from the standard. Fine. Research partners. But if we find something? When we find something, Quilmesh corrected. When we find something, Gina agreed. Things are going to get complicated. Zero, squelched over, still eating. Things are already complicated. You just noticed. He wasn't wrong. Somewhere in the back of her mind, Gina felt the first stirrings of something that might have been dread or excitement, or possibly both. Because that symbol, her symbol, didn't belong on an artifact from a dead civilization unless something had gone very, very wrong with the official story. And Gina had always been good at finding the cracks in official stories. The neutron star pulsed outside the station's windows, indifferent to extinct civilizations and impossible coincidences, and one very stubborn human who had just decided to kick over the galaxy's biggest hornet's nest. This was going to be fun, or catastrophic, possibly both. The archives of the Galactic Preservation Institute existed in a state of organized chaos that would make a librarian weep. Holographic displays floated in midair, data streams cascaded like waterfalls of light. And somewhere in the background, the station's AI hummed a tune that sounded suspiciously like it was making fun of everyone who couldn't process information at quantum speeds. Gina sat at a terminal, 3 empty coffee cups beside her, eyes bloodshot from 6 hours of cross-referencing data that should not, under any reasonable cosmic circumstances, correlate. But it did. "This is insane," she muttered, pulling up another star chart. "Which part?" Quilmesh asked from the terminal beside her, their 6 limbs working across multiple interfaces simultaneously. "The part where 18 predecessor Vanguard seed worlds are located in or adjacent to human-explored space? Or the part where Professor Uldrin has checked on us 5 times in the past hour, which is approximately 4 times more than he's ever cared about student research?" "Both. Definitely both." Gina highlighted another correlation on her screen. "Look at this. The Vanguard had installations on 43 confirmed worlds. 18 of those are within 100 light-years of Sol. That's not random distribution. That's clustering." "Could be coincidence," Quilmesh said, "but their antennae were doing the thing they did when they didn't believe their own words." "Oh, it gets better." Gina pulled up a new display. 3 installations are in the Sol system itself. Mars, buried under Olympus Mons Europa, beneath the ice sheet. And something in the Kuiper Belt that the initial survey teams flagged as potentially artificial before mysteriously losing funding. Quilmesh stopped typing. All 6 limbs went still. Humans never reported finding alien installations in their own system. "Because humans didn't know what they were looking at," Zero said from across the room. He'd claimed to be uninterested in their conspiracy theories, but had somehow ended up helping anyway, mostly by eating and pointing out logical flaws. "Your species barely made it to orbit without blowing yourselves up. You think you'd recognize ancient alien architecture?" "Point," Gina admitted. "But someone recognized it. The Council did initial surveys of Sol before first contact. They had to know." "Knowing and telling are different things," Zero said, stuffing more bioluminescent fungi into his mouth. The glow made his throat sack pulse like a nightclub. "Maybe they had reasons. Or maybe they've been lying for 80 years, Gina said. Quilmesh pulled up a linguistic analysis, their antennae twitching with excitement. "Gina, look at this. I ran the Vanguard mathematical notation systems through comparative analysis with human historical languages. And structural similarities, not the languages themselves, but the way concepts are organized. Sumerian, Proto-Indo-European, Old Chinese, they all have these weird quirks that linguists could never explain. Grammatical structures that don't match their linguistic families." Gina leaned closer to the display. "But they match Vanguard notation patterns. Like someone who spoke Vanguard languages tried to reconstruct them from memory, but couldn't quite get the details right. Quillmesh's voice had gone quiet. Like someone who forgot their native language but retained the underlying cognitive patterns. The implications hung in the air like a grenade with the pin pulled. "That's—" Gina started, then stopped. "That's impossible." "So is your family crest being on a 12,000-year-old battle standard?" Zero pointed out. "We're past impossible. We're somewhere in the neighborhood of deeply uncomfortable." The archive door hissed open. Professor Uldren entered, all four eyes fixed on Gina with an intensity that made her skin prickle. "Miss Gina," he said, voice carefully neutral, "I need to speak with you about your research." "Just getting started, Professor," Gina replied, not looking away from her screen. "Lots of fascinating correlations. Very illuminating." She saw his mandibles tighten, barely perceptible. "But there. Perhaps you should consider redirecting your focus. The Vanguard are well studied. Your time might be better spent on less explored topics." "Funny thing about well-studied topics," Gina said, finally meeting his gaze. "Sometimes everybody misses the obvious stuff because they're not asking the right questions." "And what questions are you asking?" "Why the Galactic Council knew about Vanguard installations in the Sol system before making first contact with humanity." She kept her voice level, watching his reaction. "That information's in the survey reports, flagged, classified, and very deliberately not shared with Earth governments." Uldren's four eyes blinked in sequence: surprise, calculation, resignation. "Those reports are restricted." "Then you should improve your security," Quillmesh said cheerfully. "Pheromone encryption is only effective if you remember to update the molecular keys. Yours were outdated." "You hacked restricted council files," Uldren said flatly. "We accessed publicly available research with enhanced clearance permissions," Gina corrected. "Technically different. Technically illegal. Technically interesting that you're more concerned about how we got the information than what the information says." Gina stood, crossing her arms. "You want to explain why the Council has been sitting on evidence of Vanguard presence in the Sol system for 80 years? The silence stretched. Uldren's expression cycled through several emotions that Gina couldn't quite read. Conflict, concern, something that might have been fear. "You should stop," he said finally. "For your own good." People keep saying that right before things get interesting. "Miss Gina?" "With respect, Professor, and I mean absolutely none, I'm going to keep digging." Gina leaned against her terminal. "You can help, or you can get out of my way. But you're not stopping this." Uldren's shoulders sagged slightly. He suddenly looked older, more tired. "You have no idea what you're tampering with." "Then enlighten me." Another pause. Then quietly, "I can't. The classification level is beyond my authority." "But someone has that authority," Quillmesh said. "Many someones," Uldren admitted. "The Council, the Preservation Committee, species representatives who decided, a very long time ago, that certain information should remain buried." "Information about the Vanguard," Gina said. "Information about humanity." The words dropped like stones into still water. Gina felt her pulse kick up. "What about humanity?" Uldren looked at her for a long moment, four eyes full of something that might have been pity. "If you continue down this path, you'll find out. And when you do, you won't be able to unknow it." He turned to leave, paused at the door. "Last chance to walk away, Miss Gina." "Never been good at walking away from mysteries, Professor." "I know," Uldren said softly. "That's what worries me." He left. The door hissed shut behind him. Zero broke the silence. "Well, that was ominous." "That was confirmation," Gina corrected, her mind racing. "He basically admitted there's a connection between humanity and the Vanguard." He admitted there's classified information, Quillmesh said. That's not the same thing. It's close enough. Gina pulled up a new search interface. We need to get into the Grand Archive, the real one, where they keep the genetic samples and biological data. That's impossible, Zero said. Security on that section is quantum level, unhackable. Nothing's unhackable, Gina said. No, he's right, Quillmesh admitted. Even my pheromone matrices won't work there. The biological locks are species-specific. Only authorized personnel with the correct genetic markers can access that section. Gina grinned, sharp and slightly unhinged. Then we break in the old-fashioned way. The old-fashioned way? Physical infiltration. Bypassing the locks manually. Creating a distraction while someone slips through. She looked at her companions. You in? Quillmesh's antennae twitched. Excitement, terror, and the particular brand of poor judgment that came from spending too much time around humans. This is a terrible idea. Absolutely catastrophic, Zero agreed. So, yes? Gina asked. Obviously yes, Quillmesh said. I didn't become friends with a human to make good decisions. Zero sighed, his throat sac deflating. When this goes wrong, and it will go wrong, I want it on record that I objected. Objection noted, Gina said, already pulling up schematics of the Grand Archive. Now, let's go find out why the galaxy's been lying about my species for 80 years. Outside the window, the neutron star pulsed its indifferent rhythm, marking time for civilizations living and dead, for secrets buried, and truths about to be catastrophically unearthed. Somewhere in the restricted archives, preserved in stasis fields and quantum locks, the answer waited. And Gina had never been good at leaving questions unanswered. Breaking into the most secure section of the Galactic Preservation Institute turned out to be equal parts precision planning and absolute chaos, which, Gina reflected while dangling from a ventilation shaft, was pretty much how humanity handled most problems. Left, Quillmesh hissed through the comm unit. No, your other left. Humans only have two directions. How are you this bad at navigation? I'm upside down in a tube that smells like recycled atmosphere and existential dread, Gina whispered back. Forgive me if my directional sense is compromised. The plan had seemed reasonable 6 hours ago. Quillmesh would hack the environmental systems to create a localized atmospheric fluctuation in Sector 12. Nothing dangerous, just enough weird readings to pull security drones away from the Grand Archive. Zero would position himself near the main entrance, ready to cause a distraction involving his species' natural ability to secrete highly slippery mucus on command. And Gina would navigate the maintenance shafts to reach the biological vault from above. What they hadn't accounted for was the maintenance shafts being approximately 30% smaller than the schematics suggested, or the fact that the Grand Archive's security AI had apparently been programmed by someone with trust issues and a sadistic streak. Security drone incoming, Quillmesh warned. 20 meters and closing. Little busy here, Gina grunted, wedging herself around a corner that seemed specifically designed to prevent human-sized organisms from passing through. Her shoulder scraped against something sharp, and she bit back a curse. 15 meters. Working on it. 10 meters. I swear to... Gina squeezed through the impossible gap, tumbled into a wider section of shaft, and pressed herself flat as a security drone hummed past below her, its sensors sweeping the corridor with mechanical precision. Clear, Quillmesh said. For now, you have approximately 90 seconds before the next patrol cycle. Gina didn't waste time responding. She crawled forward, found the access panel Quillmesh had marked on her heads-up display, and pulled out the bypass kit she'd assembled from spare parts and optimism. The panel's locking mechanism was bioluminescent, pretty, and also incredibly annoying because it meant she was working by the light of something that actively didn't want to be tampered with. 30 seconds of careful work. The lock clicked. The panel swung open, and Gina dropped directly into the Grand Archive's forbidden wing. She landed in a crouch, immediately scanning her surroundings. The vault was massive, cathedral-like in its scale, with rows of stasis chambers stretching into darkness. Each chamber glowed softly, containing preserved samples from thousands of species across galactic history. DNA archives, tissue samples, biological records deemed too important or too dangerous to exist anywhere else. "I'm in," she whispered. "Impossible," Zero said through the comm. "The genetic locks should have, apparently, dangling from ceiling vents, bypasses genetic locks," Gina said. "Who knew?" She moved between the stasis chambers, searching for the section marked Predecessor Vanguard. The Archive's organization system was alphabetical in Galactic Standard, which meant she needed to navigate past the Krillnock samples, avoid the Memthari section that still gave off weird energy readings, and locate the Vanguard materials before security noticed the missing panel. There, row 42, subsection 8. A chamber marked with the phoenix and sword symbol that had started this entire spiral into madness. Gina approached slowly, her heart hammering against her ribs. Inside the stasis field, tissue samples, preserved DNA, biological material that somehow survived 12,000 years of entropy. The labels were in ancient Galactic Standard, but her translator handled it easily enough. Predecessor Vanguard, Genetic Archive, Restricted Access. She pulled out her portable scanner, technically illegal, definitely not approved for student use, purchased from a very sketchy vendor on a space station that didn't ask questions if you had currency. The scan took 15 seconds. 15 seconds of Gina holding her breath, listening for security drones, praying to deities she didn't believe in that this wouldn't be another dead end. The results appeared on her screen, and Gina's entire worldview cracked down the middle. DNA match, 98.3% compatibility with baseline human genome. Not identical, not quite, but closer than humans and Neanderthals, closer than any two species that had evolved separately should ever be. "Oh, hell," she whispered. "Gina?" Quillmesh's voice crackled with concern. "Your biometric readings just spiked. What did you find?" "We're related," Gina said, her voice hollow. "Humans and the Vanguard. We're the same species. Or close enough that the difference doesn't matter." Silence on the comm. Then, "That's impossible." "Yeah, well, my scanner disagrees." Gina stared at the data, her mind racing through implications. 12,000 years. They went extinct 12,000 years ago, and somehow humanity shows up on the same planet, with the same basic genetic structure, using symbols and crests that match their civilization. "Coincidence?" Zero offered weakly. "Not a chance." Alarms screamed to life. Red lights flooded the vault. Gina's stomach dropped. "Security knows you're there," Quillmesh said urgently. "Multiple drones converging on your position. You need to move now." But Gina couldn't move. She stood frozen, staring at the genetic data, because her brain was putting together a picture that made absolutely no sense and perfect sense simultaneously. What if the Vanguard hadn't gone extinct? What if they'd done something else? The vault door burst open. Security drones poured in, weapons charging, and behind them, moving with the terrible calm of inevitability, came beings Gina recognized from her orientation materials. Council enforcers, the Galactic community's version of, "You have royally messed up and are about to have a very bad day." "Gina of Earth!" a synthesized voice boomed. "You have accessed restricted biological archives without authorization. You are hereby detained pending council review." "Worth it," Gina said, clutching her scanner. Two drones moved to restrain her. She didn't resist, partly because resistance was futile, mostly because her mind was still reeling from the genetic data. The drone's grip was firm but not painful, designed to restrain without damaging. "Your companions have also been detained," the voice continued. "Quillmesh of Hive Cluster 91 and 0 of the Western Seas." "Leave them out of this," Gina said. "This was my idea." "We're aware. Your tendency toward reckless investigation is well documented in your academic file." They escorted her through corridors she'd never seen, past checkpoints that didn't exist on any student map, into sections of the station that felt older and more serious than the museum sections. The walls here were bare metal, utilitarian. This wasn't where they took tourists or students. This was where they brought people who'd found things they shouldn't have. Finally, they reached a massive chamber, amphitheater-like, with tiered seating rising in concentric circles. Representatives from hundreds of species filled the seats. At the center, floating in a containment suit that glowed with internal bioluminescence, was something vast and ancient and utterly terrifying. "Lumfet," Quillmesh whispered beside her. Apparently, they'd been brought to the same place. Council Overseer, one of the oldest beings in known space. The gaseous entity in the containment suit regarded Gina with senses she couldn't comprehend. When it spoke, the translator struggled to render the concepts into human-compatible language. "You have accessed information classified for your species' protection, Gina of Earth." "My species' protection?" Gina shot back, fear transmuting into anger. "Or your convenience?" Murmurs rippled through the assembled representatives. Apparently, humans weren't supposed to talk back to ancient cosmic entities. Lumfet's glow shifted. Amusement, maybe, or irritation. Hard to tell. "You carry the genetic legacy of the predecessor Vanguard. You want to know why?" "That'd be nice, yeah." "Then we shall tell you." Lumfet's voice resonated through the chamber. 12,000 years ago, the predecessor Vanguard spanned 43 worlds. They were explorers, warriors, philosophers. They built wonders. They also built weapons. A holographic display materialized above the chamber floor. Images of the Vanguard civilization, cities that made human metropolises look like children's blocks, ships that bent space itself, technology that bordered on incomprehensible. But the Vanguard faced an enemy they could not defeat, Lumfet continued. Themselves. More images. War. Planetary surfaces scarred by weapons that made nuclear arsenals look quaint. Fleets burning in the void. Civilizations tearing themselves apart over philosophical differences that, in hindsight, seemed almost trivial. Two factions, Lumfet explained. The expansionists, who believed in endless growth and conquest. The preservationists, who advocated restraint and sustainability. They argued for generations. Then they stopped arguing and started destroying. Gina watched cities burn in the holographic recreation. Watched a civilization consume itself with the kind of thoroughness that only came from truly understanding how to kill. The preservationists were losing, Lumfet said, but they had one final option. A radical solution that most species would consider insane. The holograms shifted, showed laboratories, genetic manipulation on a scale that made Gina's head hurt. And at the center of it all, a single planet, blue and green and achingly familiar. They modified themselves, Gina whispered, understanding flooding through her. They reverted their own evolution. Precisely, Lumfet confirmed. They used genetic engineering to transform themselves into pre-spaceflight organisms, scattered themselves on one world, your Earth, wiped their own memories, started over. The implications crashed over Gina like a tidal wave. We're not descendants of the Vanguard. We are the Vanguard. You are what the Vanguard chose to become, Lumfet corrected. A second chance. A reset. The hope that if they survived their evolutionary childhood a second time, they might learn from their mistakes. Gina looked at the assembled council representatives, saw the mixture of pity, concern, and calculation in their alien expressions. "You've known this whole time," she said. 80 years of contact. And you never told us. Would you have believed us? Lumfet asked. Would humanity have accepted that they were a civilization's desperate attempt at redemption? Gina didn't have an answer for that. The symbols you carry, Lumfet continued, the crests, the myths, subconscious echoes, cultural DNA that survived the reset. Breadcrumbs left by people who hoped their future selves might piece together the truth. When we were ready, Gina said bitterly, when you proved you'd learned something from nearly destroying yourselves twice. The chamber fell silent. Gina stood there, processing the weight of genetic memory and cosmic irony. Her species had ended civilization to save it, and nobody had bothered to mention it. The silence in the council chamber stretched like a rubber band pulled to its breaking point. Gina stood at the center of it all, feeling the weight of several hundred alien gazes, some curious, some pitying, some calculating whether humanity was about to repeat the Vanguard's mistakes in real time. So, she said finally, because someone had to break the tension, and apparently that someone was her, just to clarify, my ancestors got so good at war that they decided to factory reset themselves back to cave dwellers, scattered themselves on one planet with a cosmic amnesia spell, and hoped the reboot would take? That is a reductive but essentially accurate summary, Lumfet said, the gaseous entity's glow pulsing in what might have been approval or annoyance. Hard to read mood in a being whose biology violated 3 laws of thermodynamics. And you've been watching us for how long? Galactic Council surveyors identified Vanguard installations in your solar system approximately 300 standard years ago, Lumfet replied. Once we correlated the genetic data and realized what Earth represented, observation became intensive. Intensive, Gina repeated. You mean you've been treating us like a Petri dish experiment? Murmurs rippled through the assembled representatives. A crystalline being in the upper tiers made a sound like wind chimes in a blender. Probably laughter. We have been monitoring your development, Lumfet said carefully, to determine whether the Vanguard's gambit succeeded. And, Gina demanded, what's the verdict? Did we pass your cosmic psych evaluation? Or are you waiting for us to nuke ourselves before making first contact official? Professor Uldrin materialized at the edge of the chamber. Gina hadn't noticed him entering, but there he was, all 4 eyes locked on her with an expression she couldn't quite parse. Concern, definitely. Something else underneath? Pride, maybe? The council has been divided on this matter for decades, he said quietly. Some believed humanity should be told immediately upon first contact. Others argued that revealing the truth prematurely could trigger a psychological crisis or accelerate destructive tendencies. So you chose option 3, Gina said. Lie by omission and hope. We never figured it out. We chose to wait, Lumfet corrected, until humanity demonstrated they had genuinely evolved beyond the Vanguard's fatal flaws. And have we? Gina asked, her voice sharp. Or are we still just failed war criminals waiting to happen? The question hung in the air like smoke. Gina saw the council representatives exchange glances, the kind of looks that suggested this was exactly the debate they'd been having for 80 years, and nobody had a satisfying answer. Quilmesh shifted beside her, antennae twitching with anxiety. "Gina, maybe—" "No," Gina interrupted. "No maybes. You don't get to drop, 'Hey, your entire species is a rebooted civilization that's self-destructed,' and then hide behind diplomatic double-talk." She turned back to Lumfet. "You want to know if humanity learned anything? Fine. Let me tell you what I think." "This should be fascinating," Bakht muttered from somewhere in the upper tiers. Several representatives made shushing sounds. Gina took a breath, organizing her thoughts. The Vanguard conquered 43 worlds, built weapons that could crack planets, had technology that makes our best stuff look like Stone Age tools, and they tore themselves apart arguing about philosophy. She started pacing, momentum building. "But you know what humanity's done? We've spent the last 80 years in your galactic community. And, yeah, we've made mistakes. We've had conflicts. We've struggled with climate change and inequality, and all the mess that comes from being barely evolved primates who only just figured out space travel." "Your point?" Lumfet asked. "My point is, we didn't destroy ourselves," Gina said. "We came close, multiple times, if the history books are accurate. But we didn't pull the trigger. We didn't unleash the worst weapons we could build just because we disagreed about the right way forward." She stopped pacing, met Lumfet's incomprehensible gaze directly. The Vanguard had everything and threw it away. Humanity has almost nothing, and keeps trying to build something better. Maybe that means the reset worked. Maybe it means we're different enough that the comparison doesn't hold. Either way, we're still here. "Survival is not the same as wisdom," a reptilian representative hissed from the left tier. "No," Gina agreed, "but it's a start. And you know what else? The Vanguard's solution to their problems was to erase themselves. Literally genetic self-destruction, because they couldn't figure out how to coexist." She gestured around the chamber. "Humanity sent me here, to this academy, to learn from other species, to study dead civilizations, to understand what went wrong so we don't repeat it. That's not running from problems. That's facing them." Zero made a wet sound that might have been approval. "The human makes a valid point." "The human is arguing for clemency," Bakht said. "Obviously, she'll present her species in the best possible light." "I'm not arguing for clemency," Gina shot back. "I'm saying you've been asking the wrong question. You want to know if humanity deserves to know the truth about the Vanguard? Fine. Here's my answer. Not yet." That got everyone's attention. Lumfet's glow shifted. Surprise. Definitely surprise. "Explain," the overseer said. Gina organized her thoughts, aware that what she said next would probably determine humanity's relationship with the galactic community for generations. "No pressure. If you tell humanity tomorrow that we're rebooted war criminals, half the planet will have an existential crisis," she said. "The other half will either deny it completely or use it as justification for whatever political agenda they're pushing. It'll fracture us worse than we already are." "So you propose continued deception," Lumfet said. "I propose earned revelation," Gina corrected. "Humanity needs to prove, to ourselves, not to you, that we've moved past the patterns that destroyed the Vanguard. We need to show we can handle climate change, inequality, resource distribution, all the problems that come from being one species on one planet, trying to figure out how to not be terrible." She took another breath. "When we've done that, when we've demonstrated we learned something from nearly destroying ourselves the second time around, then you tell us. Then humanity gets to know we survived ourselves once before, and we can decide what that means going forward. And if humanity fails? A voice asked from the shadows, deep, resonant, belonging to a species Gina didn't recognize. Then we fail, Gina said simply. And you'll have your answer about whether the Vanguard's reset worked. But at least give us the chance to fail or succeed on our own merits, without the psychological weight of genocidal ancestry hanging over every decision. Lumfet pulsed with bioluminescence, the glow shifting through colors Gina's eyes couldn't quite process. You would keep this secret from your own species. I would protect my species from information they're not ready to handle, Gina replied. Same reason you don't give children loaded weapons or nuclear launch codes. Sometimes mercy looks like patience. And you believe you can work with the Council, Lumfet said, monitoring Vanguard installations, ensuring humanity develops appropriately, all while maintaining this deception? I believe I can try, Gina said. With help. She glanced at Quilmesh and Zero. Turns out, I'm pretty good at finding competent partners. Quilmesh's antennae twitched. Pleasure and terror mixed together. This is still a terrible idea. All the best ideas are, Gina said. Lumfet regarded her for a long moment. Then the entity's glow stabilized into something that might have been approval. The Council will deliberate on your proposal. But understand, Gina of Earth, if you undertake this responsibility, you carry the weight of two civilizations. The one that destroyed itself, and the one that might yet prove the destruction was worth it. No pressure, Gina muttered. Indeed, Lumfet said, missing or ignoring the sarcasm. You will be contacted with our decision. Until then, you and your companions are confined to station quarters. The drones moved to escort them out. As they walked through the corridors, Quilmesh leaned close. That was either brilliant or catastrophically stupid. Can't it be both? Gina asked. With humans? Usually, Zero said, still eating something that glowed faintly purple. You're a species built on catastrophically stupid brilliance. They reached their quarters, larger than expected, more comfortable than a holding cell, but definitely monitored. Gina collapsed onto something that approximated a human bed and stared at the ceiling. So, Quilmesh said after a moment, how does it feel, knowing your family crest belonged to a civilization that chose extinction over compromise? Gina thought about her grandmother in Marseille, about the symbol hanging above the mantel, about 12,000 years of genetic memory compressed into one impossible moment of recognition. Honestly, she said, it feels like the most human thing ever. We nearly destroyed ourselves, so we hit the reset button and tried again. That's not giving up. That's the stubbornness to believe second chances matter. Your species is insane, Bach's voice came through the door comm. Apparently he'd been listening. Yeah, Gina agreed, smiling despite everything. But we're still here. Outside the station, the neutron star pulsed its steady rhythm. Inside, one human student lay awake, thinking about phoenixes and second chances and the weight of being living proof that sometimes, just sometimes, choosing to start over was the bravest thing a civilization could do. 3 days later, the Council's decision arrived. Gina was being assigned to the Vanguard Installation Monitoring Program. Official capacity. Full access to restricted archives. Direct reporting to Lumfet. And humanity would learn the truth when they were ready. If they were ready. Gina looked at the battle standard in the Hall of the Departed one last time, before accepting the assignment. The phoenix rose over crossed swords beneath twin moons, a reminder that her ancestors had conquered worlds and then given it all up because they believed survival mattered more than pride. And if that wasn't the most aggressively human thing the Vanguard ever did, well, Gina figured, nobody had been paying attention. She touched the tattoo on her shoulder, feeling the weight of genetic memory and impossible choices. "Okay, Grandma," she whispered. "Let's make sure the second try sticks."